The following is a presentation of The Day.
Live from the historic Garde Arts Center in downtown New London, we welcome you to the 19th District State Senate debate. Tonight's debate features Democratic State Senator Cathy Osten and her Republican challenger Steve Weir. We now take you to the moderator for tonight's debate, the editorial page editor of the Day newspaper, Paul Chauanier.
Welcome to tonight's live stream debate in the 19th District race for State Senate. My name is Paul Chauanier, and I am the opinion editor for the Day newspaper. I am moderating the debate tonight and joined by fellow panelists Lee Elsey, morning talk show host at 94.9 News Now, and a Day columnist. Also joined by Day staff writer and editorial board member Julia Bergman. The participants in tonight's debate are Democratic candidate Senator Cathy Osten and Republican Steve Weir. The Garde has agreed to host this and 3 additional state Senate debates. There is no live audience. We only have enough people in attendance for production purposes. We are utilizing social distancing, and everyone is masked except for those directly participating in the debate. The 19th District consists of the towns of Columbia, Franklin, Hebron, Lebanon, Ledyard, Lisbon, Marlborough, Montville, Norwich, and Sprague. The candidate responding to a question will have 1 minute to answer. The opponent will then get 90 seconds to respond and rebut. And the candidate who originally took the question has 30 seconds to sum up. Questions will alternate. We will begin our debate with 1 minute opening statements with Mr. Weir. Mr. Weir,
Thank you.
1 minute.
Thank you, panelists. On November 3rd, voters will have a clear choice. They're going to choose who to send to Hartford. Whether they're going to choose for more of the same spending, more of the same taxes, more of the same rush legislation and middle-of-the-night decisions, more of the same kick the can down the road on the tough decisions. Or the voters can choose real leadership. Leaders aren't afraid to make bold decisions. And I can guarantee you that bold decisions are what's needed to get Connecticut out of this mess. Continued spending and taxes are going to leave us right where we are. We need real action. We need people willing to make decisions before it gets too expensive to be here and our best and our brightest flee. As a former police officer and owner of a small business that makes a living responding to disasters, dealing with crisis is what I do best. I know what it takes to make a payroll. I know what it takes to pay down debt. I know what it takes to reduce costs. Connecticut's fiscal situation is in a crisis. It was in a crisis pre-COVID, and it's going to be even worse coming out. The clear difference is the choice of who we want leading us going forward to get us out of this mess. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weir. Senator Osten, you have 1 minute.
Thank you very much. First, I want to thank the Garde for hosting this debate and hosting all the other debates that they will have. It gives our constituents an opportunity to hear from each and every one of us. I have always made hard decisions. That is why I'm in the legislature. I worked on the legislation that put Connecticut at the highest rainy day fund in the entire country. As a matter of fact, this year, for the first time in 75 years, we put an entire tens of millions of dollars extra into our pension fund. I'm a former U.S. Army translator, a former lieutenant in the Department of Corrections. My time in the military was longer than my colleagues' time as a police officer. I'm a current state senator, and I am also the American Legion post commander for my small American Legion post in Baltic. I think that Connecticut is heading on the right path towards handling our fiscal issues.
Thank you, Senator Osten. Good.
Thank you.
Just ask our candidates to remain cognizant of the timekeepers available to you. We'll now begin in the question part. And the first question will come from Julia Bergman, and it is to Mr. Weir, and you have 1 minute.
Okay, at this point in the coronavirus pandemic in Connecticut, there have been more than 4,500 deaths and about 60,000 cases. The state today started at phase 3 of its reopening plan, and last month, Governor Ned Lamont extended his emergency powers due to the pandemic until February. Was extending his powers for this length of time necessary, and should the General Assembly have more of a say in the state's response to the pandemic and what restrictions are put in place?
Thank you. Back in March, when this pandemic first began, a lot of us were afraid, a lot of us had concerns, and we really didn't have a good grasp on this virus. So I think it was appropriate for the legislature to grant Governor Lamont those emergency powers. He set up a task force, he set up 4 phases, and he set a timeline for each of those phases. So we met the criteria for phase 3 back in July, yet the governor didn't adjust his plan, and we didn't move into phase 3. So I think a lot of us were hanging out there wondering, a lot of businesses were hanging out there wondering when we're going to get going. So I think it was not appropriate for the legislature to abdicate the power second time around and grant the governor power through February. I think we know a lot more about this virus now than we did at the time. We have the numbers, some of the best in the country, as have been pointed out. The citizens of Connecticut know how to be responsible and how to socially distance. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Osten, you get 90 seconds.
Again, thank you for the question. Quite frankly, the governor has led the state through a pandemic better than any other governor in the entire country. We are going in the right direction. I just want to say, for the record, it's not the whole legislature that determines whether or not the governor is granted an extension of powers. It's a 10-person committee with the leaders of all the caucuses on it, and it was agreed to in March fully unanimously. The extension was not agreed to on a unanimous basis, although at the meeting that was held to extend the governor's powers, every single person there said the governor was doing the right thing. Now, what I would like to see happen is I would like to make sure, like 27 other states, that the legislature and the Appropriations and Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee have a say into how the dollars, the federal dollars, are spent. I think that that's a wise move, and I think that that's what we should do, just like 27 other states do. I think that that's where the legislature can make a big difference in where we are and where we're going.
Mr. Weir, you get another 30 seconds on this
Thank
question.
you. So to clarify, the 10-person panel was split 6-4, 6 Democrats voting to grant the governor that additional power, 4 Republicans voting against. We have 4,500 approximately people dead in the state, and 75% of that, the death toll occurred in nursing homes where some of our most vulnerable people reside. So the fact that the constituents do not have a voice through their legislator, the most direct line from a constituent, from a citizen, is through the legislator up to the legislature. Our constituents do not have a voice. We are being ruled by the governor, and the legislature has given up its power unnecessarily. They should have a seat at the table to make these decisions now that we know what we're dealing with.
Thank you. I'm going to give another minute on that question. It's such an important one before we move on to the next question. Senator Osten, a couple of points raised by your opponent. One, your take on the fact that nursing homes have contributed so much to the death totals. That seems to have been a weak point, arguably, in the state's response to the pandemic. I just want to clarify you're satisfied with the way the emergency orders can be extended for the governor by the panel.
So the 10-person panel that met again, I am satisfied that the powers were extended for the executive branch to deal with the day-to-day issues of the pandemic. I'm not satisfied with the fact that the legislature does not have a say in how the dollars are spent that come in from the federal government to handle the issues. In addition to that, regarding the nursing homes, The legislature and the chairs and ranking members of the Appropriations Committee, the Human Services, and the Public Health Committee have been meeting on a weekly basis with the Human Services commissioners, including Public Health and the Department of Social Services, to deal with the issues revolving around nursing homes. And almost everything that was in the Mathematical report was recommended by the legislature. We worked diligently to make sure that we were protecting the most vulnerable in our state.
Thank you. And Mr. Weir, I'll give you kind of last word, a minute before we move on to another question. And just to clarify, it sounds like, are you opposed to the fact that the full legislature was not required to give permission for the extension of the emergency orders? Or is it your position the emergency order should not have been extended at all? And you have a minute, last word on this one.
It is my position that the emergency orders, some 70 plus of them, should have been brought before the legislature to be reviewed one by one, which are appropriate for today. Obviously, back in March and since March, the 70 plus that have been brought forward, they may or may not be have all been appropriate. But I think a full and thorough review of each of the 70 to determine which ones were appropriate back in March as compared to today. I don't think we can't say without a review that they're all appropriate for today.
All right, thank you. With that, we'll move on to another question, and we begin this round with Senator Osten, and that's from Mr. Elsey.
Senator, you were a bit conflicted when you voted for the police accountability bill. Do you think it was the right decision rushing into that controversial bill, or looking back, would it have made more sense and made maybe you more comfortable and others more comfortable if you waited until a new group of legislators were seated before you moved forward on that?
Thank you very much for the question. I really appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit about the police accountability bill. The police accountability bill is a 44-section bill, and the question that most comes up is the question revolving around qualified immunity, one component of that bill. I actually worked with the writers and the authors of that bill to modify what they originally planned with qualified immunity. I do not believe that we needed a brand new legislature to deal with the issue. I would have preferred had the bill followed a normal process and gone to the Public Safety Committee, of which I'm vice chair, to review the different sections. That being said, I did get a chance to put on the record the night of the bill and said that that bill should have some modifications, and we have a use of force report coming out in December that we will modify that section of the bill at that time.
Thank you. And Mr. Weir, you get 90 seconds to provide your opinion on the police accountability bill.
Okay, thank you. So I respect Senator Osten for her vote, respect her for her service. I'm disappointed in her vote. She debated on the floor with Senator Winfield, called it a flawed bill, called it rushed, and then went ahead and voted for the bill. And it is beyond me how one of the most egregious parts of the bill, which you had an issue with, you went ahead and voted for a bill in special session, rushed, that affects our communities, our law enforcement officers, and their families. I was a police officer in Glastonbury for 5 years, or just about 5 years before returning to the private sector. And during that time, I learned a lot, I saw a lot. And I would say that our law enforcement officers run into situations that most citizens would never want to address. They go to accident scenes, they go to burning buildings, they'll go to death scenes, trauma scenes, violent crimes, and they do so without the benefit of having a lot of information going into that scene. So the qualified immunity really is has the potential to cause an officer to hesitate in a moment when action is needed. And I'm afraid that this flawed, rushed, and bill that's quoted as lack of transparency could get an officer killed. Thank you.
Thank you. And Senator Osten, you get another 30 seconds on this question.
Thank you. Today I attended a graduation ceremony for 83 new state police recruits. the dollars for that class came from a bill that I authored and put through. It was in the 2019 state budget. We put in money for another state police training class, which will begin in January. Do you know who voted against the money for those 2 new police training classes? Every single Republican in the Connecticut state legislature. For almost a decade, I fought to have police officers and firefighters covered for post-traumatic stress.
Senator Osten, your time's expired. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question then begins with Mr. Weir. And it comes, we asked some of our readers if they wanted to text in questions, and I've got one from a Megan Robinson. She points out that southeastern Connecticut is now having its biggest spike in COVID cases. She notes that Senator Osten pushed aggressively for opening the casinos well before other states opened theirs. And she's questioning, what is Mr. Weir's opinion? Did he agree with that? And it is a decision that should be reconsidered in light of the spike the region is seeing now. And we begin with Mr. Weir, and you have a minute.
So just to clarify, the question is, should the casinos have been reopened?
Essentially, the readout would pointed out that Senator Osten was a strong proponent for getting them opened. She was wondering, one, if you agreed with her position at that time, and what is your position now concerning the casinos in light of the spike we're seeing in the region? And you have a minute.
Thank you. Well, I'm not so sure that we know exactly where that spike today is coming from. I don't think it's certainly at all pointed at the casinos. I think the casinos have taken a number of steps to keep people socially distanced, to focus on hygiene, focused on hand washing and also cleaning of surfaces. So as far as I'm concerned, well, I guess I don't know, but I'm not going to say that this is certain. It has anything to do with the casinos being open. They've been open for a few months now. The spike is occurring now. I doubt that their behavior or their protocols have changed. So I think it was a good thing to open the casinos in a safe manner, follow the guidelines, and ask people to be respectful and follow the guidelines.
Thank you. Senator Osten, you have up to 90 seconds on this one.
I'm not certain what my part of the question is. The question was, does Mr. Weir agree with the decision that I made to support 2 of the largest employers in the state of Connecticut that employ, they're both number 7 and number 8 respectively, the number of employees that they have working there. They provide the single largest dollar amount from any corporation in the state of Connecticut come from both casinos. And they have taken extraordinary steps to be safe, in part because while they're large businesses, they are essentially family-owned businesses, and their family actually works there. So I agree with the decision that we made. I have and do stay in constant contact with the leaders of both tribes to make sure that they are not seeing a spike in COVID. They have paid attention to the numbers. They are testing their staff. They do more than we have required of any other business in the state because they want their consumers to have consumer confidence. They are both still only open 25% because they want to make sure that they are keeping the numbers of COVID down in the region and in the area. I think that we need to learn how to respect these 2 large businesses who provide.
Thank you. Mr. Weir, again, another 30 seconds if you need it on this question.
I think, I don't think I have anything to add to that.
All right. Thank you. Our next question goes to beginning with Senator Osten, and it comes from Julia Bergman.
Okay, on the topic of the coronavirus and the economy, the U.S. Commerce Department recently released a report showing that Connecticut's economy shrank by nearly 1/3 in the spring and early summer due to the, given the closure of many businesses in the state due to the pandemic. What, if anything, should the state do to aid businesses that have been impacted by the coronavirus pandemic?
So when we first closed down the state at the beginning of the coronavirus, and we started recognizing the impact that it would have on small businesses, I wrote to both all of our federal delegation and had a consortium of other legislators to ask the federal government for some very specific things to help out businesses. A grant for the Unemployment Trust Fund so that we don't have to increase costs for small businesses or large businesses. I asked them to provide some resources for our two tribal nations so that they could survive through the pandemic. I asked that we would make sure that we were providing both PPP, not PPE, but PPP, so that businesses could be successful.
Thank you. Mr. Weir, you got 90 seconds on this question.
So I think prior to the pandemic, spending and taxes were killing small businesses in our state. The policies in Hartford have been killing small businesses and causing people to pay more. So regardless of the recent uptick in incoming residents to the state, Connecticut's one of only 3 states to lose population between 2010 and 2018. So I think what the state of Connecticut could best benefit small businesses and the citizens of the state by reducing regulation, by cutting taxes, which first starts with cutting spending. Our infrastructure is clogged and our bridges are failing. And so I asked, what are we getting for all this money that we pay in taxes? I think the best thing that the state of Connecticut could do is make sure that it's creating an environment where small businesses can thrive and get back on their feet more quickly as the pandemic passes. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Osten, 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. One of the programs that I again authored was the Jobs Pipeline program that has been supported by the legislature to make sure that our employers were having properly trained, well-trained employees. Those are things that help out small businesses, and I think we need to continue to move in that direction.
Thank you. Our next question is going to go to Mr. Weir, and it's from Lee Elsey.
Since we're talking a little bit about the budget, Mr. Weir, most Republicans will normally be in favor of budget cuts. If you're one of those Republicans, specifically, what programs or jobs would you be willing to slash? And conversely, Senator, if you're not willing to cut anything, what would your solution be for a growing budget deficit? We'll start with you, Mr. Weir.
So, as a small business owner, I can look at how we treat this topic how we would as a small business. Number 1, you set a budget. Number 2, you stick to it. And number 3, you don't spend more than you take in. And the state of Connecticut doesn't appear to operate like that, doesn't want to operate like that. So I guess if we're looking at cuts, I would take out the budget and you look at where you're going to make the most impact. We have a pension that is well over $100 billion underfunded. We have a debt per resident of Connecticut that's over $50,000. If we were going to true up today, we send a bill to every resident of the state of Connecticut. So I think not to take the hard choices, we're going to be in trouble. Thank you.
Senator Osten, 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. So I'm not really certain what my colleague is talking about when he talks about not making hard choices. We are now down to the 1950s level of state employment. That's where we are today. That has been made in the last 5 years that we have been in the legislature. 1950s level of state employment. We fully cut 1,000 positions just a year and a half ago. In addition to that, we pay this year $100 million less in salaries than we did a decade ago. 100 million less in salaries. This is the first time that we have paid the actuarial amount of what is owed on our pension systems. That was under Governor Malloy. As a matter of fact, after he inherited a $3 billion deficit from Jody Rell, she took $100 million out of the pension plan. Quite frankly, it's been a problem that is now on a trajectory to being resolved. And in regards to the question on what I am willing to cut, I have cut out of every single line item in the budget, over and over and over. I think that it's important for people to recognize that this budget is less than it was. We are at about the 2010 level of budgeting, but it's true now, not
All right, if you can wrap up there. Thank you. Another 30 seconds on the issue of the budget, Mr. Weir.
So yes, very quickly, regardless of what the claims are of the cuts or the levels, employee levels back to 1950s, I would say that the situation that we're in with all this debt, we're not doing enough, and we need to look harder. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question to you, Senator Osten. It was mentioned in this prior discussion about the budget. The state pension system continues to be grossly underfunded. Paying for it takes up an ever bigger piece of the budget. As you mentioned earlier, you are a retired corrections supervisor. You receive a pension of about $65,000 annually. Should state pensioners such as yourself be open to a freeze in the cost of living or some other adjustments as part of a plan to return the state pension system to solvency?
Thank you. So again, let me make this perfectly clear. Connecticut's pensions have never been fully funded since they were created in 1939. That's 80 years of not funding pensions through 8 Republican governors and 7 Democratic governors. In fact, again, I point out that one of the last acts Jody Rell did as governor was to postpone a $100 million payment into the pension fund in order to avoid making budget cuts. So that's the background. The pension debt in Connecticut has been building up for 3/4 of a century because everyone was having dinner and leaving the grocery bill for the next generation. Now Democrats are showing fiscal responsibility and paying the bills, and we're addressing it now. As a matter of fact, we just transferred $61 million into the rainy day fund, out of the rainy day fund into the pension fund. Your immediate question is, do I think that there should be a pay freeze for retirees? I think that that would have to be graduated. Some retirees only get about $30,000 a year, and that's what they live on. I think that we would have to look at the exact level of what each retiree is making.
Thank
I had
you.
to finish my sentence.
Thank you. I appreciate that. 90 seconds, Mr. Weir, on the question of state pensions. I mean, the question was whether a freeze on cost of living or some other adjustments to existing pensioners should be part of the solution, but certainly I'd like to hear your other ideas on trying to help solve the state's pension deficit problem. 90 seconds.
Thank you. Well, I think we are left with not many options should we not make bold decisions. We can send every person a bill for $50,000 to clear up our obligations. We could consider opening up the state contract to make it work for all parties, or we can continue the way we are and not address this seriously and risk the state going bankrupt. I would say that the governor had the ability most recently to cut $600 million by statute and instead chose to cut $200 million. He had the opportunity to freeze state employee pay raises for a tune of $700 million over 2 years, and he chose not to. So I think we need to go back to the drawing board, look at what a real tough decision looks like. This doesn't look like it to me.
Another 30 seconds on this question, Senator.
Thank you very much. I didn't hear my colleague say what his choices would be on the pension fund. It is clear that he doesn't understand that current retirees are not covered under the CBAC agreement, that is not the way it would work. It would be a prospective bill, not a retrospective bill. The hard decisions would be going to each one of those retirees respectively on an individual basis. They're the ones that have the right to choose. That's how it is set up here in Connecticut. Thank you.
I'm going to give Mr. Weir just another 30 seconds, kind of directly pointed to you that you don't seem to understand the situation with the pensions. I wanted to give you 30 seconds to elaborate.
Fair enough. We've made agreements, so if we're going to stick to those agreements and honor them, then we need to look elsewhere to make our finances meet ends meet.
All right, thank you. Next question is going to go to Mr. Weir, and it begins coming from Julia Bergman.
Okay, switching gears to housing. Connecticut is one of the most segregated places in the country, both racially and economically. Should the legislature supersede restrictive zoning rules that discourage integration and affordable housing in many suburban towns in the state?
Fundamentally, I believe that the power to control zoning laws and other ordinances rests with the municipality. What works in one municipality, it's not a one-size-fits-all with another municipality. That goes for schools, that goes for zoning, that goes for housing. So fundamentally, I believe in leaving the power and leaving that decision up to the local municipalities, the local towns, local cities to decide what's best for them. The infrastructure in Hebron is going to be different than that in Hartford, and that's the sewer bill, that's the transportation, so I'm for leaving it locally, under local decision.
Senator Osten, you have 90 seconds on this.
Thank you very much. The affordable housing statutes are complicated at best. I think that there needs to be a rejigger of the affordable housing statutes to recognize where affordable housing is already, which doesn't seem to get recognized. So in a town like the town of Sprague or the town of Lisbon, they already have affordable housing, and when an affordable housing project is built, it's often more expensive than the current housing stock. And the reason why that current housing stock does not get counted is because it's not deed restricted, even though the rents are less or the mortgages are less than what happens at an affordable housing project. In addition to that, if we're going to look at affordable housing, we also have to understand that the infrastructure needs to be there. Most small towns, including the suburbs that are in rural areas, do not have city water or city sewer. They can't even build the larger housing projects there because they are not set up to have those larger housing structures. So I think that that needs to be looked at. The Department of Energy and Environmental Protection has rules in place regarding infrastructure such as that, and in the town of Franklin, denied them from extending a sewer line down so that they could have a larger commercial area because they did not want sprawl. If that is going to be part of the problem, then we need to look at the whole thing, not just look at the concept of affordable housing, but the necessary infrastructure to support that. And I'm sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Weir, you have another 30 seconds on the issue of affordable housing.
I don't have anything to add to that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next question begins with Senator Osten, and it's from Mr. Elsey.
So Connecticut's minimum wage will hit $15 an hour on June 1st, 2023. Following the June 1st, 2023 increase, the minimum wage will be tied to the Federal Employment Cost Index, essentially going up every single year. Conceivably, by the end of this decade, Connecticut could have a minimum wage of about $20 an hour, actually over $20 an hour. Considering the middle rung employee salaries would have to go up accordingly to what the minimum wage salaries would be going up, how would small businesses stay afloat if that were the case?
So I don't think that small businesses lose business because they're paying their employees a minimum wage. This minimum wage is going up over 4 years and 10 months in order to allow small businesses to comply and focus on what they need to do to pay their employees, which is essentially not a living wage in Connecticut. $15 an hour is a wage that allows people to have some dignity in their life. And I think that that's something that we should want our employers to provide for our employees. I think that we need to start looking at a whole host of policies that keep people into the category of the working poor, where the state has to provide them with food stamps, heating assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weir, you have 90 seconds.
So I'd like to make the distinction that I don't ever believe that the minimum wage was meant to be used interchangeably with the living wage. Minimum wage is meant for entry-level jobs, entry-level positions, with the expectation that somebody is going to further their skills, further their development, and work their way up. I have 3 daughters. I have, 2 who are eligible and working age. So seeing that, going to the ice cream parlor, going to a restaurant, having somebody scoop ice cream, I don't consider a $15 minimum wage, when you factor in the burden and all the other costs, that becomes a $20 to $25 an hour employee. So how are those costs passed down? They're passed down directly to the consumer. So what I think we should be looking more at is a training wage that would allow jobs for those young people who are just looking to get through school, get into their careers. A living wage is not the same as a minimum wage. There's a big distinction. And by raising those costs up, those fees get either passed down to the consumer to the point where they're unbearable, or businesses find other ways and they replace employees with kiosks. And I believe by raising that minimum wage to a point where it's unbearable to the consumer, you actually have a negative effect on employment. Thank you.
Senator Osten, another 30 seconds. The suggestion of some kind of a tiered system so everyone doesn't earn the same minimum wage.
So I think that what my colleague is not recognizing is that the living wage in Connecticut, being paid by nursing homes to their employees, being paid by nonprofits and group homes to their employees, is that minimum wage. That is what the living wage has become. And it's a boondoggle to talk about high school students getting this wage. I think that we need to start recognizing that people need real dollars in order to be successful, and that allows us to put money back into the economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, I'm going to go back to one of our readers, and this is from Tammy Stott for our candidates, and she would like to know where the candidates stand on if legislation came forward for the removal of the religious exemption to vaccines for students, how our candidates would vote. The religious exemption is the most widely used exemption among parents who don't want their students, children vaccinated. And first crack at that is with you, Mr. Weir, and you have a minute.
I am against removing the religious exemption. There were hearings held at the state capitol, or legislative building, over the pre-COVID, and you had thousands of people turn out, hundreds of people actually testify with compelling arguments for leaving that religious exemption in place, leaving it up to the choice of the parents. There was talk that the number of vaccines today given out to children far exceed those when I was a youngster, far exceed those even when my youngest, who's now 12, the number of vaccines and the concern for vaccine harm is there. So I wish to leave that religious exemption in place, leave it up to parental choice. That's it.
All right.
Thank you.
Senator Osten, where do you stand on whether or not to remove the religious exemption with vaccines?
Thank you very much for the question. I happen to be up in the legislature and talked to many of the people that were concerned about exemptions being removed. And in other states, there are other types of exemptions that would cover most of their concerns. I think we need to look at it comprehensively. I think that the religious exemption does not fit the need of the people. They're using it because we have not updated our statutes to cover what is really necessary. Most of the people are concerned about that are concerned about vaccines have true medical issues that they should be covered under those medical exemptions. I also think that we need to look at where we are today. In the world of a pandemic, where a new vaccine is coming out, I think we need to pay attention to what the science says and what medical doctors are telling us that will make people safe. There is a component of herd immunity that we need to pay attention to. I do think that we have to give parents an opportunity to fit into another niche if they don't want to participate, but I don't think it should be the religious exemption. As a matter of fact, many of the religions say that they don't believe in the religious exemption as it is written today.
Mr. Weir seemed quite clear to me that he wanted parents to have the right not to have their children vaccinated if that's what they choose, and still be able to send their children to public schools. I'm not quite as clear. I'll give you another 30 seconds. I want to be clear on where you stand on that.
So I wanted to go into what the people were saying when they came up, and I would point out that many of the people that were talking at the legislature were not from Connecticut. They're from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. They came up to talk on this one piece of legislation. I think we need to update our entire statute revolving around exemptions to make sure that people have an opportunity to actually get a medical exemption when they are truly in need of that.
Thank you. Mr. Weir, another 30 seconds. You want to comment what you heard?
I think what I heard was leave it up to the choice of the parents and make it so that they have another alternative if the religious exemption doesn't fit.
Thank you. Our next question is to Senator Osten, and it comes from Julia Bergman, and you'll have a minute.
Okay. This year, there's been a resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement in response to police killings of Black Americans. Do you think the state has more work to do in order to abolish systemic racism? And what steps do you think should be taken toward equality?
In many respects, America never really accomplished the reconstruction that was supposed to occur after the Civil War. That was short-circuited by President Andrew Johnson and others. And what we as a nation have been left with is over a century of deep, vile, institutional racism, the impacts of which are felt to this day. It's felt in education, in the workplace, in housing, in the court system, in family life. It has dragged America down and prevented us from living up to the ideals we as a nation expressed in the Declaration of Independence and in our Constitution. I think that it's much broader than the Black Lives Matter movement. I also know that there is racism when it comes to the Native American tribes that are in our state. 2 federally recognized and 3 state recognized tribes often are not put on the same level as other people. As a matter of fact, even in this moment, they were told to stand down and wait. It wasn't their turn.
Thank you. Mr. Weir, you have up to 90 seconds on this question.
Thank you. I agree with the words Black Lives Matter. I agree with the sentiment because Black lives do matter. And I wish I saw a more humanitarian outreach. I don't see increased volunteering at the street cleanups in Norwich. I don't see increased volunteering at the schools or at the soup kitchens. I'd like to see more efforts with getting to know one another and more efforts to help your neighbor. I think in order to come together and understand, we're going to have to agree to a two-way conversation that doesn't start and end with shouting, demonizing one another, or destroying property. In my years of service, whether as a police officer, a leader in my community, or in my church, I've tried not to allow myself to be categorized in one group. Ultimately, we're all citizens of this country, and certainly the law should be colorblind. We need all parties to come together for a constructive conversation. That's the only way we're going to move this forward. As the next senator of the 19th District, I will work in a constructive way so that all citizens of Connecticut have an equal opportunity to reach their dreams and see their version of success. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Osten, another 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. I would say that, of course, we need to talk to each other, but we do need to change some of the laws, and that requires making those hard decisions that my colleague said he was willing to make. But I have heard him give, in essence, just platitudes instead of what those hard decisions would be that he would want to make. Where are the hard decisions in the criminal justice system that he would want to address in housing and in education? And if he is going to cut the budget,
You could wrap up.
what are those cuts that he's going to make that will directly impact that?
Thank you. Mr. Elsey, you have the next question. It goes to Mr. Weir.
We're gonna switch gears a little bit. 2018, 2019, pretty much we were dominated by one topic and one question. And considering that the budget for 2020 and beyond, considering COVID is involved with this, is going to be lacking. So if you are against tolls on Connecticut highways, can you explain how the state could realistically raise enough money without raising gasoline taxes to improve the infrastructure and essentially maybe help with the budget?
Mr.
Well,
Weir.
thank you. I have been an opponent of tolls. I think we do not have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. So until we're willing to look at all the facets of the budget, determine the effectiveness of the programs that we have, of where that money is being spent, and really look at it as if it was coming out of our own pocket, because it is, then maybe we're going to get down to the bottom of balancing the budget. I do not believe it's going to come on the backs of Connecticut taxpayers. I do not believe it should come in the through tolls or increase in the gas tax. We have some of the highest taxes already in the country. This money should have been earmarked and left for the Special Transportation Fund. It should have, our roads and bridges, for the amount of taxes we pay, should be in really great shape. So the question is, where's that money going?
Senator Osten, paying for the transportation infrastructure. Your turn, 90 seconds.
I do believe that this is the same question I've been asked for the last few years, and I'm a member of the Transportation Fund. I've looked at the Special Transportation Fund. We've never taken money out of the Special Transportation Fund. As a matter of fact, we've put more money into the Special Transportation Fund. Quite frankly, we're the only state on the eastern seaboard that does not have tolls. I drove to my aunt's funeral the other day into Massachusetts and paid tolls. The fact is that every state, including Florida and Pennsylvania and New Jersey, all have tolls to keep their infrastructure up to par. It is ludicrous for us not to recognize the real cost of items as they are today. We need to understand that if we're going to do true budgeting, our Special Transportation Fund will run out of money in 2 years. In 2 years. We need to make sure that we're repairing infrastructure. Infrastructure is extremely important, and quite frankly, we don't have the highest gas tax in the country. We haven't had the highest gas tax in the country. Countries across this nation are raising their gas tax prices even though they have tolls. We need to institute a policy and pass it so that we have the real dollars to make sure that the Gold Star Bridge, with its 80-year-old steel, is repaired.
Thank you. Mr. Weir, I'm going to give you a minute. I'm going to give Mr. Weir a minute because I want to see if you can clarify if the question was, if we don't have tolls, where do you propose the money comes from for our infrastructure? And I'm going to give you a minute because I know it's a complicated question. If you could just elaborate some for us.
Well, I don't want to say I'm confused, but it's perplexing to me why we don't look at the spending side of things versus the revenue side or the tax side. So I guess if the Special Transportation Fund has money going in it, then money wasn't diverted before it got there. We haven't had tolls, I believe, since the 80s, but we are one of states who have an income tax, we have gas tax, we have high property tax, we have high sales tax, and on and on. So I think we need to look more at where we're spending our money, just as I would as a small business owner, just as we do with our personal finances. Each and every one of us does not spend more than we take in, or we're in big trouble. I think the state needs to take a lesson from the citizens of Connecticut and look at how we spend our money. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is to Senator Osten, and this was emailed to me from a reader. The question: for over a decade, the state legislature has been freezing or diminishing funding for our nonprofit social service agencies, while expecting those agencies to provide more services and meet expanding demands. What actions would you take, if reelected, to provide more resources for these nonprofit social service agencies? And we begin with you, Senator Osten.
Thank you very much. I agree with the person who sent that in. Connecticut has moved many of its services into the nonprofit realm of things. That's what we have done to cut costs. As a result of that, many of those nonprofits who have not seen a significant raise at all to cover things like salaries of their employees, who are often only making $10, $11, or $12 an hour. We need to rejigger the system that we have. If we had not gotten into this COVID and the pandemic that we're in, the Appropriations Committee was looking at a 10-year plan to increase the dollars into the nonprofit world, that we have put many services that used to be done by state employees.
Thank you. Mr. Weir, you have 90 seconds.
So can you repeat the question?
The question, and please no time till I get the question out. For over a decade, the state legislature has been freezing or diminishing funding for nonprofit social service agencies providing state services, while expecting those agencies to provide more services and meet expanding demands. What actions would you take, if any, to provide more resources for these nonprofit social service agencies? You have 90 seconds.
Fair enough. So this is state services, state agencies. I think we would need to look at the budgets that those state agencies are running by, and also the state would I think that the state would need to look at those budgets and determine where the needs are.
That's it?
That's it.
Another 30 seconds for you, Senator Osten. You took the question originally.
I think that my opponent just doesn't know how many services have been transferred out of the state realm into the private nonprofit world, creating a significant cost saving on the state budget, but having the nonprofits not have enough resources, and all of their dollars come from the state. All of their dollars come from the state. By keeping a flat budget that we have for over a decade, this has created a crisis in the nonprofit world, and we need to address it.
Well, thank you. Next question is to Mr. Weir, and it comes from Julia Bergman.
Okay, I have another reader question. This was submitted by Larry Earhart on Facebook. He says, Governor Lamont and the state of Connecticut has been using up money in the rainy day fund in order to maintain spending obligations this year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. With an expected deficit of $2 billion in fiscal year 2021, which just started, what is your position to raise state revenues to meet and maintain state obligations next year?
Well, once again, I'll repeat, I think we need to look at the spending side. I do not want to sound like a broken record, but when we talk about ways to raise revenue, I've not heard ways that we're going to look to cut spending. So before I would talk about raising $1 of revenue, we need to go take a hard look at the budget and determine how we are going to cut spending. Are we getting the most value for the dollars that we're spending? Who is looking after that money after it leaves the taxpayer's pocket and goes and gets taxed? Who's watching that? And is it being spent as wisely as if it were your money in your pocket? So before we looked at any additional revenue, we have to look at the value of the dollars being taxed. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Osten?
Can you repeat the question? I don't think I got the middle part.
Yes, he's asking about Connecticut using up money in the rainy day fund in order to maintain spending obligations this year due to the pandemic, with an expected deficit of about $2 billion this fiscal year, which just started. What is your position to raise state revenues to meet and maintain state obligations next year?
Thank you. Quite frankly, we thought that we were going to use and have more than a $500 million deficit in last fiscal year, and we ended up with a surplus of $61 million, which is being used to pay down pension liabilities. Right now, the revenue estimates coming in are on a conservative basis, more than what was anticipated. I don't think we're going to use as much of the fund balance or the rainy day fund to meet our obligations this year. There are many things that we could do. First, I do believe that we, as we always do in appropriations, go through each line item in the budget and trim where we can without eviscerating the safety net. There are revenue items such as sports betting and online gaming, which would not only help out the state budget, but would provide a mechanism to modernize our two largest employers in the state and help them be as successful as they possibly can. I would hope that those real dollars would go to offset a tax that is not done by the state, is done by local municipalities. I had a plan in and a budget in last year to provide real dollars to every single municipality to help out with the property taxes.
You have another 30 seconds, Mr. Weir.
Just want to reiterate that I don't think I would rely on the rainy day fund. I think we need to look at where we're spending our money. Again, the governor could have paused $350 million in state employees in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of emergency, when we have 70 plus executive orders, businesses shut down, lack of revenue coming in, and we're still spending at the state level, at levels as if everything was just great.
Thank you. Lee, do you have a question for Senator Osten?
Sure, I was going to, since you mentioned sports gaming, I figured since you got the two biggest employers in basically in our area, in our backyard, if you actually got a chance to sit down with Governor Lamont, who seems very much against sports gambling, how would you advise him moving forward concerning what could be, a revenue generating scenario for us?
So you and I have actually talked about sports betting before. I think that sports betting and online gaming are simple things that need to be completed by this governor. We have two of the largest businesses in the state in eastern Connecticut. Both Mashantucket and Mohegan tribes support this area in many ways. They provide for over 12,000 employees when they're fully up and running. This governor needs to respect the two largest businesses in the state and sit down and talk with them, which has not really happened. And quite frankly, if he is not willing to do that, I think the legislature should pass a bill that codifies sports betting and online gaming and IKENO into law, requiring him to come up with a compact agreement.
Mr. Weir, your opinion on legalizing sports gaming and sports betting and online gaming?
So recognizing that these are two the finest casinos really in the world, I've been to both of them as a citizen for expositions, for business, for entertainment, and they're both shining stars for Eastern Connecticut. Many years ago, I had neighbors who would drive all the way to Atlantic City to visit the casinos down there, and then we have the benefit of these two casinos being built, and now people are coming in from all over to support these casinos. So I support the casinos. I support the fact that they operate on sovereign land, and I think one of my first actions would be to reach out to the governor, reach out to Governor Lamont and look to find a path towards an agreement. What has been the roadblock up until now? I don't have that, the kind of the behind-the-scenes discussions, but I would like to understand what is the issue with moving this forward so that we can support two of the largest employers in our district.
Another 30 seconds on the issue from Senator Osten.
Thank you very much. It's been reported in newspapers across this state. The issue revolves around exclusivity and other people that are interested in sports betting, like sports tech or like the lottery. I again point out that we have two of the largest businesses, and I point out that they have, in 1 month, gave $19.5 million to the coffers of the state of Connecticut. In a full year, Sports Tech gave $3 million. We need to stop pandering to other businesses and recognize that we need to support our flagship casinos.
Thank you. With that, we've reached 8 o'clock, so we are going to our closing statements, and 1 minute each, and we begin with Senator Osten.
Thank you very much.
Closing statements.
Thank you very much. I am the only choice to move the 19th senatorial district forward. I have come up with and authored policies and procedures that have helped out each and every town in this district with real resources. And not only have I helped out the towns, I meet with constituents every single day. And whether it's Allison Quirion in Hebron to help her get her son dyslexia training in the schools, or whether it's the Gene Swift, who I talked to today about what is going on at Waquanic Village in Norwich, I am the one that represents the 19th senatorial district on a day-to-day basis. I love doing this work. I love working with people, and you are why I am here today. Each and every one of you, I support you, and you support me. Thank you for all your time.
Thank you, Senator Osten. And Mr. Weir, you get last word, 1 minute.
Thank you. The Connecticut legislature has been by and large controlled by Democrats for the past 30 years. During that time, our status in the nation has declined. We used to be known as the insurance capital of the world, and now I'm not sure what we're known for. Up until this artificial COVID-driven influx of people moving into the state, we had one of the highest numbers of people moving out. We have one of the slowest growth rates, and we have some of the highest utility costs in the nation. I grew up in Connecticut. I've lived here all my life. I've got married here, and I've raised a family here. I have friends here, businesses here, and I've lived a life of service here. I want a future for my children so they're not compelled and they can afford to live here and they'll want to stay here. I want Connecticut to be known as a place of opportunity. One-party rule isn't good for anyone. Without vigorous dialogue and a clash of ideas, the people of Connecticut are shortchanged. Legislation should not be about what feels good. It should be about what makes sense and addresses the most pressing issues of our time. Thank you.
Thank you. With that concludes tonight's debate. I thank our candidates. I thank you, the viewing audience, for giving us some great questions tonight. And thank the Garde Arts Center for hosting tonight's event. And wish everyone a good night. Make sure you vote. Thank you.
Thank you.